All right, so here we go again. We are talking about Texas government now. We're going to talk a bit about the Texas Constitution. The Texas Constitution is the second longest constitution in the United States. It is second to Alabama's. All right. From the beginning, it sought to limit government. That's important. It is important to get that principle across, that America in general started, and I say started, with the notion of limited government. You have to remember that as one of the principles upon which our government was founded, on limited government. Why is that? Because when you have bigger or more government, you have less freedom, right? The more the government gives you, the more the government does, the more the government governs. You understand that? So when the government gives you health care, the government governs health care. It tells you what you get, what you do not get, when you get it, when you do not get it. Okay? When the government governs schools, and if you watched last night's lecture by Joe Biden, the President of the United States, he said, listen to this, and it was all the commentary out there is going, what a subdued, non-controversial speech, because he was all like lazy about it, right? Highly controversial. One of the things he said that's highly controversial is this. He said, we the people does not mean the citizens, it means the government. What? No, we the people means we the people, not you the government. Okay? Well, highly controversial. Well, the original document, the original framers, they did not want government interfering with their freedom. They sought to limit government. Texas, even more so, it was more explicit. It wasn't just, generally stated. They were very specific in their approach because they wanted to limit. They did not trust government. Why would anybody trust government? Especially now, it's a weird thing. We're in this weird paradox where we trust government. A certain political party, I don't know which one it is, Democrats, they'll sit there and they don't trust the police. Well, the police is the government. That's the executive branch of any city, state, or federal government. The enforcement of laws, the execution of laws, is the executive branch of government. And if you don't trust them, but yet you want to grow government bigger, well, what do you do when you govern things and people don't fall in line with how you govern them? You have to police it, right? People don't like government. They like government giving them stuff, but they don't like the duties that come with having government, like the bureaucracy, the rules, right? I don't like that. I don't like losing my freedoms to a bunch of bureaucrats. I like the freedom to drive, right? But then all of a sudden they create roads, and when they start creating roads, then they start creating laws about how the roads should be run. And then once they create those, then they say you got to get a license, and they say you have to be 16 to drive. And I'm beyond that, but and I accepted it back then. But then they go, you can only drive this fast, or you have to drive this fast, or you have to drive in this lane. Now it all makes sense for safety's sake, right? So some of these things are necessary. They are necessary. But then there are things that are not necessary, and you go, why do we do these? It becomes arbitrary. And when there's arbitrary rules, then then we start finding ourselves subject to them, and that's where tyranny creeps in slowly. And Texas did not want that, so we sought to limit government, and government has a tendency to grow. It's an animal that just keeps growing, and it will not stop until everybody's oppressed by it. I know that sounds bad. Okay, and then there are some who just say, we need more government, we need more government, we need more government. And we don't, right? Because we got to, the principle of limited government. Well, that was what Texas desired, was limited government just from the beginning. Article 1, Section 1 claims Texas sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is self-rule, okay? This idea that Texans were to rule themselves, that we would not be ruled over. section, I'm just gonna blaze through the section 26 of Article 1 forbids monopolies that are contrary to public interest. I'm gonna give you two. What is a monopoly, first of all?
Like a country that's ruled by.
Not a country, but a company. But it's not just a company. Like if you owned, let's say, the internet, and it goes all. Let's go all the way back when all this stuff started, like people buying up all the oil, right, and all the means to produce oil, right? There are different ways you could structure a monopoly, but ultimately, what happens is you become the only force in the industry that has any power, and you can make all the money and you can get rid of all your competition. You have so much power that competition can't even get a foothold. Okay, so imagine now, let's say go back in time to the 90s when the phone company AT&T had a monopoly. There were no other phone companies that could actually compete with AT&T. They'd be put out of business almost right away, and so nobody'd even go to these companies so that they could grow. They just have to go to AT&T, and AT&T could charge you whatever they wanted because they owned it. All right, and they told you how you would, and it becomes such a necessity of phone, right? Imagine that with oil. Well, nowadays, what are some of the monopolies that have come about as a result of new technology?
I think Facebook and Google.
What'd you say? Facebook and Google. Facebook put MySpace out of business pretty much. Okay. Google put basically, if you do any search, internet searching, you are more than likely going to do it on Google, right?
Yep.
And if you're going to do any advertising, you're more than likely to do it on Google. Why? Because more people are on Google. So you're not going to go to Bing, and all these other search engines, because you're less likely to get traffic. And Google is basically putting these other companies like Yahoo, Bing, and etc. America Online, I think, had an Explorer, I think was the old search engine, right? Some of us may still use that, I don't, but anyway, but nonetheless, I mean, now we have Google as a monopoly, and so Texas right now is considering certain legislators, and the governor in Texas are considering certain actions against Google, Twitter, Facebook. And why are they doing that? Because Google, Facebook, and Twitter have been using the algorithms, and YouTube have been using the algorithms and manual inputs, that is, into their software and their programs to limit the free speech of conservatives. Where if you are a conservative, if you are a pro-Trump guy, they will not allow some of your videos up. Now, if you know anything about YouTube, you can monetize your videos, right? And if you monetize your videos, that means people advertise with you. And after you get so many hits, you get a cut. You make money off of it. And there are people like Steven Crowder who have millions of followers. And so he would make a lot of money off of this. Joe Rogan. There are others out there like the Epic Times. Huge followings. But what these companies have done is they've demonetized these guys' these companies or people's YouTube pages, and so that they get no money from it. They also have taken off some of their, Prager University. They've also taken, or PragerU, it's called. They've taken off their ability to make money, and they've also taken off disallowed certain episodes they've put on because they challenged the narrative of Google's political views. So the higher ups in Google, who owns YouTube, they're very political people. They're Democrats, they're liberal Democrats, they're socialists, and they don't like people challenging that. So what do? They have cut out certain videos, they have forbidden certain videos, they've censored certain videos, they've literally added certain tags to certain videos, okay, warnings to them, okay, And so what do? Oh, Twitter's done the same. Twitter went so far as to shut down Donald Trump's account, right? The president of the free world. They have shut down a microphone. Now, imagine back in the old days, there was a public square, and you could go to the public square and you could stand and you could talk and people would listen to you. We don't do that anymore. What is the public square now? Today, the public square is the media, and it's through YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, right? And so the president was reaching millions of people through Twitter, and he was reaching them with his message, not the message of the news, that the news is going to take what he says, and they're going to take one word out of what he says, and they're going to make a whole story around it, and he's not going to like it, because I used to work for the news. I can tell you, the news does not like Republicans, all right? And so they're writing all these bad stories about Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump was using Twitter to criticize the news, calling them fake news and stuff. Do you recall that? So what ends up happening? Eventually, Twitter says, well, we're not going to let him talk anymore. So they shut him down out of the public square. So now where can the millions of, and he had millions of people following him on Twitter. Where can Donald Trump go to get his voice heard like that now? Well, he can't. There's okay, he can, but so this new app called Parler, which is like Twitter, popped up. And it gained, I think there had 1 million downloads in one day. And it was all conservatives doing it, saying giving the middle finger to Twitter, right? For doing these kinds of things. And so what he did was, he didn't actually even go over there, but all these other people went to to Parler, and Google and Twitter got together, and Facebook, and they shut Parler down.
Yeah, and Amazon.
And Amazon, because Jeff Bezos owns the servers that Parler was on. I almost sent my computer back. Apple, iTunes said they were no longer allow them to download the app from iTunes. And then they got Bezos to say, you can't even be on our servers if you want, because they started their own, right? I wrote an article a long time ago called He Who Controls the Microphone Controls. And I was saying, conservatives, you don't like the fact that the news is not being conservative if they're being mean to you, or guys, if you don't like how Facebook is being mean to you, or YouTube, go start your own, right? Get your own microphone. Well, that's what Parler did. But then what you realize is Bezos pulled the plug out for the road out from under him. And so now Parler actually came back. It's not as big now. I'm not saying it's not big, but it's not as, it was growing really big during the election controversy. Okay. So anyway, but Parler is like tiny compared to Twitter. Twitter has a monopoly. Twitter has a monopoly. YouTube has a monopoly. Facebook has a monopoly. Google has a monopoly. Bezos has a monopoly on the servers. Bezos is Amazon. Okay, and they have a monopoly. And they put people out of business, and they are specifically putting people out of business who do not agree with them politically. Is that just? It is absolutely unjust. It would be unjust if they were conservatives doing this to liberals, okay? Because these people have taken possession of the public square, which ought to be public, and are now using it for their own private positions. And they are saying they are limiting free speech. They're limiting what people can and cannot say politically. In fact, they say, well, you say whatever you want. Well, of course you can say whatever you want, but you cannot communicate whatever you want. They're trying to limit what you can communicate. By the way, this is true for Christian churches. As they preach the gospel, they're being limited too. Well, Texas recently has been talking about limiting what these guys could do, Twitter and stuff. That if they start cutting off the conservatives and stuff, they're going to start suing them here in Texas for money and making them pay reparations for this stuff and pay damages. And you start having to pay out billions of dollars from these companies, and they're not going to like it. They're not going to like it. Another thing that's trying to being pursued by conservative congressmen in Texas. Now I know we're talking about Texas government, but one of the things being pursued is them getting rid of a particular privilege they have, that they are not subject to being sued for libel or slander, because they're considered merely a platform for people to put their stuff on that they are not publishing. But they're trying to revoke that. I think it's Section 203, it's called, which prevents them from being sued. There are people trying to get that revoked because they actually are acting as though they are editing this. They are, because they are editing the content. They're keeping some people on and some people off. They're putting warnings on some and giving the free go-ahead to others, okay? And so this is a big thing. So in Texas government, we seek two things. One, limited government, but then also limited monopolies. It's limiting the power over others. That's the theme. Okay, there seems to be a theme of freedom that goes on in Texas. That Texas is sovereign, we want a limited government, and that we want the freedom to do things, and we don't want these monopolies keeping us from succeeding in our own endeavors, that they could choke us out, okay, with their own industries, whether that be in oil, the railroads, or even in the digital age. Article 2 of the Texas Constitution, again, it's the second largest constitution in the nation. It breaks the government into 3 branches, typical of the U.S. Constitution, same as that in the U.S. Constitution. It just starts off. Article 1, Congress. Article 2, right, the presidency. Article 3, the judicial branch. In this case, we have to wait until Article 2 before they start doing this, because Article 1 is establishing the sovereignty and the limited government of Texas, okay? All right. 1, the legislative branch. We need to know this. The legislative branch, obviously it legislates. It is one of the least paying jobs in the nation. We intentionally pay our congressmen and senators very little. Why is that? Why do you think that is? Because we like poor congressmen? Why would you pay them very little? Because we want them to be civil servants. The idea, we want them to serve government. We don't want them to make this their career, that they're career politicians in the federal government, and you go, well, this is just your job. You just, as long as you keep your, being elected, you keep getting a paycheck, right? Instead of doing what is right. If you were serving in the Texas legislature, you are literally serving. You have to have a real job or be really independently wealthy enough to survive, because you will not survive off the pay in Texas government, okay? More, yeah, not to mention, this type of work, when they, Congress gets called into session, you need to be able to have money going along with it, because you won't be working, you'll be in session, right? It's very horrible pay. And there are 150 members of Congress, the House, and there are 31 members in the Senate. Now, interestingly, going back to our federal government, Texas just gained 2 new House seats. And California just lost 2 House seats. Why is that? Population, remember? So, population of California has dropped dramatically, as it has also done in New York City. Texas and Florida, our populations have grown dramatically. Why? People want to be here. Why do people want to be here?
I think taxes.
Taxes. We are free from taxes. and they are taxing. So look, if you want to help a state where people want to be, what do? Lower taxes. I was watching a video by Jose Canseco. Jose Canseco is a famous baseball player from the 1980s. And he got in a bunch of trouble. He was a steroids dealer and all that stuff. And he wrote a book called Juiced. He broke the whole scandal wide open about steroid use in baseball. Well, anyway, in this interview, they asked him how much he made. What he said about $55 million. And then he blew through it all. He had nothing. He was living in a garage, okay, for months until he got another job. And they go, where did it all go? He goes, well, you'd be amazed. First of all, just because you make $55 million doesn't mean you have $55 million. $55 million, 40% of that right away, 40% of that right away went to the government, taxes. That means he probably, out of $55 million, he probably had somewhere to spend, maybe it was 55 million of 20 take off, that's a $35 million. You still think that's a lot of money, right? But then all of a sudden you lose a wife and she gets half, cut that in half. Then you, then you buy some homes, you buy some business. Oh, the stock market crashed and he lost a bunch of money there. He goes, there you go. It's all wiped out. I was done. And he says, you'd be amazed. And then legal fees and then getting sued. And yeah, so, and just being a bad money manager. How's that? I mean, baseball players are good at hitting the ball and catching the ball. They're not good at maintaining money. Well, anyway, so you want to be in people want to be where the government's not taking their money. Okay? You don't have to be a multimillionaire to recognize that the government takes a lot of your money. Gas is going up in price. Why is gas going up in price? Because taxes are going up. Do you guys have a job?
Self-employed.
You're self-employed. Okay? You pay taxes on, don't you? I hope you do.
I do.
Do you pay a lot of taxes?
Not a lot. I think it's fair. It's depending on the money.
Well, you're in Texas. Yeah, you don't pay a lot compared to California. You don't pay a lot compared to New York. It's relative.
Yeah.
Now, we got to pay taxes because we have government. Government, All right. All right. The House, they're 2-year terms, just like the federal. You have to be 21 years of age. You have to be a U.S. citizen up until we leave the Union, but that's a joke. And you have to live in Texas for 2 years and in your district for 1. So if you want, and by the way, I just got an email from the GOP. So if you were so inclined to want to join the Grand Old Party, otherwise known as the Republican Party, they're having a workshop on how to enter into politics. And that would include how to raise money, how to advertise, how to run, and all that good stuff. But that's for Republicans. Contact me if you're interested. So you have to be a year in your own district. So, can't just go, I want to run in this district and not actually live there. All right. In the Senate, those are 4-year terms. In the Senate in the U.S., those are 6-year terms. So there may be a question on that. Asking what the difference is. All right, they stagger them. It's just like the U.S. so that you're not electing the same, and so that the senators are not all up for re-election at the same time. That breeds stability. All right. I think you have to be 26 years old and 5 years in the state and 1 year in your district. Anyway, moving on, let's see. Here we go. Here's some of the limits they're going to put on the government. They limit their salaries, as I said. All right. And one of the things that limits the Congress is the comptroller. The comptroller is part of the executive branch that controls the budget. So Congress can't just start willy-nilly passing things to spend money on things unless it's contained within the budget, and that helps us not spend more than we have. California has a really bad problem of getting themselves into debt. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you guys know who he is, the Terminator, the Governator they called him, 20 years ago-ish, around 2001, maybe a guy named Gray Davis was the governor of California, and I was in California at the time, and a recall effort happened, and where they were trying to get rid of the governor, and so there are petitions going out. Currently, there's a petition going out to recall Governor not Gray Davis, oh crud, I can't remember his name, Gavin Newsom. And Gavin Newsom is getting recalled right now. And so basically the people in the state of California have signed this petition, millions of them, in order to have a new election to get rid of the guy and replace him with somebody. Well, that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got brought into office, was Gray Davis was recalled. They had an election, and one of the questions on this election, it says, should you recall Gray Davis? The answer would be yes. If so, who would you like to be your governor? And they would call, well, there's this thing called the jungle primary out there. I don't know if it, the way it works is whoever gets the majority, so that you could have all these people running. And so if you have like 20 Democrats running and one Republican, and the Republican doesn't really get a lot of votes, but he just gets more than all the other Democrats because they are all competing against themselves. Keep in mind, California is heavily Democrat, right? You can get a Republican governor. Well, right now, Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor of California because they're recalling Gavin Newsom. Why? Who's Caitlyn Jenner?
Bruce Jenner.
You know who Bruce Jenner is. Bruce Jenner is the decathlon Olympian from like the early 80s or late 70s, I can't remember. Super athlete, right? One of the most athletic people in the world, decides he wants to be a woman. Now he's running as a Republican. I don't like that. I'm a Republican, and I'm not much for the transgender thing. I think it's gender dysphoria. I don't think it's a legitimate thing, and I'm going on record saying that. So I don't think that's something the Republicans ought to be endorsing, although I would probably agree with Bruce on several things having to do with, say, government spending, perhaps border security and the like, but I would disagree with him about sexual ethics for sure. All right, so let's get back here to talk about, we were just, hold on, I want to make sure, I don't want to get too off topic here. Just a little off topic. Anyway, so as Article 3, as they start to define the branches of government, we get into the executive branch of Texas, and this is important. This is one of the most important and most distinctive things about the Texas government above all other states, and how it's different than the federal government, is that Texas breaks up its executive branch where all the executive authority isn't vested in one person, right? We have a governor, and he has a certain set of powers, certain things he does, but there are things that our governor cannot do, okay? And the different people, and I'll give you the different positions in the executive branch, they are all elected. So it's like you can have parts of the executive branch actually be Democrat and other parts be Republican. They can completely disagree. They can completely fight with each other, right? That's generally not the case. If we, the reason I say this is because if you're going to have a Republican governor, it's more likely that the people who voted are also going to vote for a Republican lieutenant governor too, all right? And so each one of these branches or positions have their own powers, and they're distinct from the other ones, but they are still part of the executive branch. Now in like New York with Cuomo, all those powers would be in him, and what he would do is he would create his cabinet, and he would be their boss. And it's like, how the president has his cabinet, like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Interior, Secretary, Urban House and Development and all that. and you have all these, housing and urban development, and then you have the Secretary of State. Well, those are all offices in Texas that are elected on their own. They are not hired and confirmed by, they're not, nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. So this guy, he's not their boss. They're kind of like his equal in some ways. And it strips a lot of power from the governor, and some people believe that the Texas governor is really just a figurehead and doesn't have much power at all. They suggest a lot of people suggest that the most powerful position in the Texas government, at least in the executive branch, is the lieutenant governor, who has different powers that tend to be much more interesting. Okay, we can discuss those in a few. So here we go. The governor, you have the governor. He is a figurehead. He does have some power. And one of the powers I'm going to go back to is he has veto power, just like the president does. But even better than veto power like the president has, he has what's called line item veto. What is a line item veto? That means if Congress comes up with a spending bill and they say, hey, we're going to do this here, and we've all passed it, he can say, yeah, I'll sign it into law, but I'm going to veto this portion of it, and this portion of it, and this portion of it. And I think that's a very healthy thing, because we talked a bit about pork in U.S. spending and U.S. laws. And so what they could do is they come up with a spending bill that I'll say to you, I say, hey, look, I need you to vote for my bill. And you say, yeah, I'll do it if you put my pet project on there too. Right? And I go, okay, sure, I got to vote. And I'll vote for that crap too. And then I go to you and I say, hey, I need you to vote for my bill. And you're like, absolutely. But my state, we need money for, to refurbish the Golden Gate Bridge. And I go, well, that has nothing to do with what we're trying to do here. And you go, I don't care. I'm not voting for your bill. Let's just throw it on there. And I go, fine. And that's called pork. Okay? And, pork barrel spending, there's a whole, history to why it's called pork barrel. But, and it's actually quite racist. But the history of it, just it's a history of adding things to bills to where they have literally nothing to do with each other often. And what it does is it ends up making bills huge, for one, and two, expensive in another way. And so the line item veto allows our governor to go through and go, look, I'm glad y'all signed on to this bill and you added all this pork to it. And guess what? Let me just strip it away. He has a right to line item veto these things, get rid of all this stuff. And I think that's a healthy thing. And I think if our president had that ability, that would be a good thing too. We could get down to some lean, mean, bills, and they wouldn't be like 10,000 pages of bills that they don't even read. Okay. All right. We have the governor. We have the, like I said, he's the kind of like also the head ambassador of our state. He's the figurehead. He has the bully pulpit. He could talk. He gets to get his message across. He could call special sessions. This is a thing that Congress hates about the governor. Because they have to work and because they have to have, feed their families and then run their own businesses, they can't afford to be coming in to serve all the time. And so if he's not liking what he sees, he can say, look, you better get this thing done or I'm going to extend your session and make you stay in there longer, stay away from your families and stay away from your businesses. Or he could even say, you do what I say, or I'm going to call a special session, make you leave your families and your business. You're going to come in and you're going to come in and deal with this issue. And so that's a very powerful thing that the governor has going for him. Then we have the lieutenant governor, and he's the president of the Senate. And I'm going to look up a little more. I'm going to give you a little more on him. I don't want to give you a list on him. Okay, who's our current lieutenant governor?
For Texas?
Of Texas, yes. not of anywhere of the Congo. Dan Patrick.
So the lieutenant governor is different from the actual governor?
Yes, he is. It's kind of like the vice governor.
Oh.
Yeah, but you don't have vice governors in other places, or lieutenant governors, right? You have the governor usually, right? And that's what you have.
Yeah.
And then you have your mayors of your cities. We have a governor and a lieutenant governor. Like I said, they break up the duties. We have the Secretary of State, and that is here's a question here. This is the only office that is appointed by the governor in the executive branch. Okay, so there's only one office in the executive branch that is actually appointed by the governor like other states, and that is the Secretary of State. The comptroller, as I said, the comptroller deals with the funds of the state. Then you have the Commissioner of General Land and he manages state assets, investing in mining rights. This sounds like a very boring job. You think, oh, governor or Secretary of State or lieutenant governor or comptroller is even kind of cool. Comptroller is very powerful position. But the Commissioner of General Land, I mean, think of it. You're a farmer, a rancher, a miner, what do we do here in Texas, especially in Houston? Energy, minerals, oil, gas, all that stuff. That's the guy you got to go through. Okay? Anything that literally makes the Texas economy go requires this branch of government and this person to go through. Because if you're going to be a rancher, well, you need to deal with land, right? If you're a farmer, land, right? If you want to dig for minerals, why would we want to dig for minerals? What do we use minerals for? And I'm not just talking vitamins. We mine for things. Think about, imagine, you buy into this whole global warming stuff, and you go, oh, we got to stop global warming, which means we got to stop using natural gas, and we got to stop using oil, and we got to start using solar. Well, and we got to start using electrical cars. Where does all this stuff come from? How do you make batteries? What do you make batteries out of? Well, let's put it this way: minerals. You got to dig for this stuff, right? So you have to mine for this stuff. How do you make solar panels? There's all sorts of minerals that go into the solar panels. There are holes all over the earth that are huge, mining, okay, for these minerals. So if we're going to mine for anything, I don't care if it's gold, silver, any of the things that would go into any technology, for whatever reason, you'd have to go through this part of the executive branch. Very powerful, okay? And especially in our political climate today. All right. And also given the fact that, all the regulations on oil and gas, this makes it an especially powerful position in government. Then you finally have the Attorney General, who is the lead attorney of the state, okay? And that they will prosecute all criminal cases and have other dealings of the state that are all legal, okay? All of these have 4-year terms, okay? This creates what is called a plural executive. You do not have a singular executive, you have what's called a plural executive. Article 5 creates the judicial branch. I'm skipping. There are going to be some articles I do skip here. Article 5 establishes and creates the judicial branch of Texas. I spoke to you on the judicial branch of government in an earlier class, and I claimed that Texas is the only state, one of only 2 states that has 2 Supreme Courts. One court for criminal cases and the other for civil cases, all right? Unlike federal judges, Texas judges are elected by the people. This turns our judicial branch into something that is somewhat political. The federal government desired that our judicial branch be unelected people who were appointed by presidents and confirmed by the Senate, and that they would have lifetime appointments, and that these lifetime appointments meant that they never had to run for office. And if you don't have to run for office, you don't have to please the people. You could just make legal decisions that have no political ramifications. You're not going to be kicked out of office by making an unpopular decision. That is but however, is that good? It's good in the sense where you're not like, look, the emotions of people, they get really emotional, right? And they don't think rational. How many of you guys watched the George Floyd case? How many of you have an opinion on it? Everybody, do you even know what I'm talking about? You do, of course you do. Because the news told you, the TV told you, your friends told you, the LeBron James told you, right? All these movie stars told you. Do you think they watched the case? I know they didn't before they started talking. They started running their mouths before the case ever went to court, right? They had already determined what happened, who was guilty, who was innocent, how the guy died, if he died from drugs. They determined that George Floyd was innocent, even though he was in the store passing off counterfeit dollars, even though before he had, had pointed a gun at somebody and robbed them at gunpoint, right? This guy's a hero, even though he's a career criminal. Died of asphyxiation due to a guy on his neck, even though he was so full of drugs that he probably would have died anyway. Was saying he couldn't breathe before they even put him on the ground. I watched every day. I watched that trial. And I watched the whole video, and then I watched the commentary on it. I watched the emotion, and I saw that people were going, "We are going to riot." And Maxine Waters, who I can guarantee didn't watch that trial either, out there saying, if we don't get the verdict we want, I want you to get out there and become, I forget what she said, but she was like, get in their face, okay? More confrontational, she said. More confrontational than burning down buildings, okay? All right. Those people are going to vote for judges, okay? Can you imagine those people voting for judges? And they want outcomes, and they don't even listen to the evidence. They want an outcome without listening to the trial. They wanted a guy hung before he ever had due process of the law. Remember, that's one of our constitutional rights, is that if you're charged with a crime, you have due process, that they have to prove you guilty. You don't have to prove yourself innocent, right? They want all that stripped. And so, in a sense, you don't want a political judge. You want a judge who's able to rule this case and say, look, if this case isn't going the way it should, we're going to call it a mistrial. And I don't care because I'm not going to get kicked out, right? That's the kind of judge you think you'd want, right? Well, in many states, those kind of judges are actually not appointed, but voted on. And Texas is one of those. And so he can literally run on a platform saying, I'm tough on crime. Okay? Or he can say, I'm for reform. And depending on the political climate, he could be elected or reelected depending on how his court cases go. Now that can be also good because it doesn't turn out that our federal judges are actually apolitical, that they're without politics. They're actually quite political. They're very political, and that's become a problem. And then once they become so political, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you can't get rid of them until they die. She finally died in office, and when she died in office, there's this big hoodoo about Donald Trump replacing her with Amy Coney Barrett. Amy Coney Barrett, they're like, oh, she's a conservative. Well, it's supposed to be an apolitical position, remember? So there's a, Texas just says you're gonna vote for them, and we do, okay? There are 9 criminal and 9 civil Supreme Court justices, or judges we'll call them here in Texas, okay? 9 and 9. Article 7, it has to do with education. It established the University of Texas system, and it established the Texas Agriculture and Mechanical School, otherwise known as Texas A&M. Agriculture and Mechanical. Here's a little insight to you. Whenever you have like the university system, like you have the University of California or the University of Texas, okay, those are usually research facilities, usually. And then if you have what are called the state schools, like Texas State, that's not necessarily true in Texas is kind of weird, but if you have like Cal State Fullerton, in New Mexico you have the University of New Mexico, the research facility, and then you have NMSU, New Mexico State University. The state schools, one, are usually looked upon academically as lower, okay? And that just might be because one's a research and one is not. But the state schools are the agriculture schools. So that's like, so NMSU is known as the Aggies. And that's why Texas A&M are called the what? Aggies, right? The agricultural, it's an agricultural school. So that's what that was. So that usually you want to establish 2 types of schools. One is a research for higher learning. The other one's for agriculture and engineering type stuff. As far as amending the Constitution, we've got a couple minutes to go. 17, Article 17. I skipped ahead quite a few articles, didn't I? If you want to do that, it's proposed to the legislature in a regular or special session. A regular session is when they meet every other year. They don't meet every year. They meet every other year. And a special session is whenever the governor says, you're getting together and having a special session. To amend the Constitution, needs to be approved by 2/3 of each of the chambers, the House and the Senate. Then a statement about this amendment, if they want to change the Constitution to the Texas government Constitution, a statement has to be published in all of the newspapers in each of the state, okay? So all of the members, not every single one, not like, HBUs. Do we have a newspaper for this school? School paper? Why not? That's amazing. We should have a school newspaper. Anyway, not school newspapers, but that'd be amazing. Inez Elementary, where I went to school, they're having to publish this stuff. Well, anyways, they have to publish it in all the state newspapers. When I say state, I mean major newspapers in the state, because the state doesn't own the newspapers. All right, why do they have to do that? So the citizens can know about it. And then why do they want the citizens to know about it? Because then there has to be an election, and the state people have to amend the Constitution. They have to put this in the election, okay, as a proposition, and you look at it and you go, yeah, I accept this. And so once 2/3 of the state, of both chambers accepts this, then it goes to the state, and the citizens accept or reject it. So you could have a unanimous Congress in Texas saying, yeah, let's amend the Constitution, and then it fail at the ballot box because the citizens say, no, that's not what we want. You may want it, but we don't. That's a different, in America, the federal government, that's not the way it works. We don't really have a say as individuals about any constitutional amendment. The only way we have a say is by electing the people who will do such things. Okay? All right, we'll call a class on that today. Make sure you watch the videos on the Capitol, right? And the 2 videos on the history of Texas. There are quizzes to follow. I put one up today. There may be, very well maybe, one more today. And then tomorrow is Friday. That means I have no classes except for my, one that I do online, which means I'll probably put another one up tomorrow. So as we get to this last week, imagine yourself having to watch the rest of the lectures and then learn much more about Texas and be quizzed upon it, okay? On it. Make sense? Y'all good? Any questions? We got a final coming up the following week, okay? That will be online. That means after the last day you see me, you will not see me on the day of the final. And it will come up at a certain time for a certain amount of time. And then once it's done, you're done. And your grade, and by that time I will have weighted all the grades, because not all grades are equal. Like the midterm will be more, final will be more, the other quizzes will be less. There'll be an attendance, grade, which you guys will be fine. Those who have not been here and have not been approved to not be here, right, will also, they'll be like, wait a minute, I didn't attend. And that you should understand. Okay, so it'll all be weighted, so once you get your grades in, you'll be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm gonna get. Okay, there'll be no subjective grading. None of it's my opinion. It's just where you're quizzed, okay? All good? Excellent, good.